flute friends. That was Ernesto Kohler's Opus 33, Book 1, Etude for the Allegretto Vivo. So today we're going to talk about how to deal with some of those wide leaps and how to practice them to make them more smooth. We're going to talk about the articulation markings and the dynamic markings throughout. And then we're going to go through the entire etude, break it into sections, and talk about what the important ideas are in each section. So let's start with some of those wide leaps, which come to us right at the very beginning. One of the biggest challenges in this etude are the leaps up to the high notes at the end of each phrase in this opening section. So the first one is in the second measure, that B natural to the high E. So a good way to start working on that is to actually use the harmonic, overblow the harmonic for that E. So I'm going to play the high E, but I'm actually going to finger the low one and let my lips settle into that fingering. Once I can do that pretty consistently, then I want to alternate the harmonic fingering and the regular high E fingering, and I want to see if I can get the pitch to be pretty consistent between the two. This is going to help me to lower the pitch of that high E, which tends to be a little too sharp and a little too bright. And it may take you several tries. In fact, it may take you several days of several tries to get those to kind of line up for you. But do some work on that. If you can super focus your embouchure to get that high E with the harmonic fingering, then when you open it up to the regular fingering, it becomes that much easier. We can do the same thing with the notes in measure 6, where we're going from that B now all the way up to that G sharp. So again, we're going to start with the harmonic fingering to establish that. And then once I can get that comfortably, I'm going to shift to the regular fingering. And the regular fingering, by the way, includes the right hand, number 2 and number 3, just to again lower that pitch of that high G sharp closer to where it should be. So add those 2 fingers on the right hand to help yourself out. So what we're doing by working on that and putting them side by side is we're working on establishing the correct pitch of those high notes and also really super focusing our embouchure to get that airstream exactly where it needs to be. Now, once you've figured out that flexibility issue and you've worked past that, the next thing to think about is the larger phrase in which those intervals occur. So in this first section, we have a consistent marking. We have an accent on the first note of the first measure, and then the whole thing lightens up to that staccato E in the second measure. So we have a 2-bar phrase, a 2-bar idea. It basically starts with that accent and then goes to that lighter quarter note at the end. You can think of that accent not as being powerful, but think of it as just being kind of heavy or weighty. So you're going from weight essentially to lightness. It's a feeling of sinking down to sort of raising up, kind of like a balloon lifting off at the end of that phrase. So we want weight there, but it's not a whole lot of tongue. It's not this. It's not that explosive beginning, just a lot of sound, a lot of tone. And each phrase in this section has the same idea. It begins with a heavy note and kind of releases to that lightness. Heavy note, release to lightness within 2 bars. and so on. So whenever you see that accent, really the whole way through this piece, it's less about that explosive percussion sound, and it's more about a weighty and toneful type of sound, just to bring that note out and give it some depth and some weight. All right, so let's move on to the different sections of this piece. We've already started talking about the first section, which goes basically from measure 1 to measure 16. That's the idea of this heavy first note transferring to the light note at the end of 2 bars. That idea goes the whole way through the first 16 measures. Once we get to measure 17, we have kind of a change of ideas, and I call this section B. Section B that I'm looking at goes from measure 17 to measure 38. And the idea in here is this stark contrast between dynamics. It opens with a phrase that is forte, so that should again be just as weighty and full of depth as you can get it. And then it's followed by this piano up in the high range, which you want to be just a very light and delicate sound. So the key to this entire section is that real contrast between these forte sections and these little segments of piano. So the way that I think about these changes is when I'm playing forte, I want to direct my air as far down into the flute as I can. I want to get as much air in there, and it almost gives, if you do a lot of this, it can give sort of an amplified sound almost. So I'm not putting tension in my lips. Instead, I'm kind of allowing my lips to let the air come through, and I'm letting a lot of air come through. So I'm getting a nice full sound on that forte. Then when I get to that piano, that air goes from going into the flute, it's going to pop up and kind of go straight out in front of me. I want a lot less air to get into the flute to give me that light sound. So a good way to practice this section is really separate every single dynamic and make sure that your embouchure is making the right shift for that change in direction. And once you've practiced that with those spaces and you can shift from a good forte to a good piano, then try to get rid of the spaces and make that shift happen more quickly. Later on in section B, starting at about measure 28, actually we have one before there in measure 26, this idea of decrescendo becomes important. So we're starting loud with the air directed downwards. On that diminuendo, that air is just going to gradually lift into that piano position as you're going up that passage. So again, take those passages very slowly, not because the technique is hard in the fingers, but really think about what your embouchure is doing and where your air direction is going. Get a nice smooth transition of the air direction going through each one of those diminuendos. So that covers section B, which again is from measure 17 to 38. Starting in measure 39 and going through measure 45, we have kind of an A prime. We go back to our original idea, so we already talked about that. And then 46 at the Pio moderato, obviously that's a new section. And I consider measure 46 through 58 to be the main part of this section, which I'm calling section C. We have two things happening here. We have these accented notes that are over the 16ths, and then we have the crescendos. The crescendos are really the main idea. The only thing those accented notes are doing are telling you where the melody is, right? So the note in between those accented notes are actually sort of a pedal tone. They are less important and you don't have to worry about them so much. So if I were to simplify the melody starting on the Pio moderato, here's what I would have. So do you see what I'm doing? I'm focusing on those accented notes. Those are my melody notes. Now, when I add the notes in between, I just want to barely touch them. That's all. So again, that accent is less about an explosive and powerful accent, and it's more about just allowing those melodic notes to come through. The crescendo is actually much more interesting in this entire section. So don't overplay the accents, spend more of your attention on the crescendo in that section. And then finally, the coda, there's this little tag or coda at the end, measure 49 through the end. That's where it drops way down to piano, get a nice light sound like we practiced earlier, and make that just very clean and very agile the whole way to the end. So I hope that helps and gives you some things to think about. Please like, subscribe so that you see the next video. Happy fluting to you.